Here we go, friend. Before we start, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop your country, city, or a cozy little corner in the comments. I love seeing our sleepy map of the world light up, one calm heartbeat at a time. They look like nothing, thin, green, almost shy about their own importance. You could slip a dozen between two fingers and still feel as if you were holding air. And yet, when one of those little rectangles landed on the kitchen counter, the room changed in a small, specific way. A mother paused mid-unpack. A father glanced over from the doorway. A child scooted closer on a chair with both knees tucked up, ready to help. The day's groceries had arrived, yes, but so had a promise so quiet you had to be still to hear it. Keep going, keep saving, keep folding the ordinary into something extraordinary. At the register, they came almost as an afterthought, torn from a roll with a gentle rip of perforation, slid across the counter with your receipt. The clerk did it without ceremony, like handing over change, but the shopper tucked the stamps away carefully. Pocket, purse, glove compartment, sometimes just between the pages of a notepad until you got home. The drive back felt a little different when you knew the little green passengers were riding along. 5 miles of soft plans and imagined toasters, a few more blocks of what-if bicycles, an extra turn home past the neighbours' hedges with a picture of a new radio quietly assembling in the mind. When the door swung open and bags met the table, the stamps came out last, as if they had been saving their entrance for when everybody could watch. A small stack. Not many, never many, but it wasn't about many. It was about momentum. You set them by the sugar bowl or next to the fruit and suddenly the kitchen felt like a workshop. Someone fetched the booklet from the drawer, the one with the cover that curled a little at the corner, the one that felt sturdier than paper because it was storing patience. It smelled faintly of glue and coffee, of the drawer itself, of all the evenings it had been quietly waiting its turn. There was a particular kindness to that glue. It asked only for a lick and gave back the satisfying drag of adhesion, a tiny resistance that let you know it was working. Adults had their way of doing it, steady, economical, one stamp after another, with the practiced rhythm of people who balance checkbooks and tie off trash bags with one hand. Children had their own choreography, tongue out, eyebrows furrowed, a little too much moisture, a thumbprint of damp proof. The stamps went down crooked sometimes. It didn't matter. A palm slid over the page to smooth them, and even the crooked ones became part of the neat rows, like a choir where every voice has its place. You didn't usually talk much while you did it. Or rather, you talked about everything except the stamps, and somehow that made the moment better. A question about school followed by an answer about the dog, a thought about the price of peaches, a memory about the last time the booklet got full, and how you all went downtown to the redemption centre, and the man behind the counter wore a tie the colour of a rainy morning. The stamps were the work of the hands. The life of the household happened above them, like clouds moving over a field that keeps growing whether anyone notices or not. If you ever looked at a single stamp by itself, it was almost comical to think it could lead to anything. What could one thin square do? But the page told the truth that a single stamp couldn't. Rows across, columns down, a map of steady effort. Each page finished felt like placing a brick in a wall you couldn't see yet. Each book finished felt like stepping onto a step that hadn't existed the day before. There was math here, but it was the kind that calmed the mind. The addition of tiny things, the tally of days, the discovery that thrift feels less like restriction and more like motion when you can hold it. There was a way the booklet made time feel friendlier. Most days rush past in a blur of have to, but stamps only cared that you kept showing up. They didn't punish you for weeks that were lean, or months when the car needed something new, and the envelopes felt emptier than you'd like. They just waited, blank spaces smiling politely, ready for next time. In a world that could be noisy and impatient, The stamps offered a slower beat. They taught you how to see progress at a glance, how to accept that not everything arrives in a single afternoon, how to enjoy being on the way. People chose a thing to aim for, but the thing itself had a way of changing while the pages filled in. It might begin as a shiny idea, a mixer with a graceful curve in the handle, a bright enamel toaster that promised even browning, a set of plates that matched in a way your cupboard had never quite managed. After a month of stamps, the thing became less about shine and more about use. The mixer meant fresh bread on Sundays, the toaster meant faster school mornings, the plates meant every guest found a place at the table with something unchipped in front of them. The object didn't glow because it was free. It glowed because it had been paid for slowly with attention. There were tiny rituals within the ritual. The counting out loud in 5s, then 10s, even when no one needed the math spelled out. The way someone always straightened the stack of pages before closing the cover. The pencil line on the inside flap where you tracked how many books were already full. A little ledger of effort. Sometimes a child would draw a tiny star when a page was completed, like marking a night sky that had just gained another quiet light. Even the drawer had its roll, sliding shut with a soft wooden sigh, as if sealing away a secret the household would share only when it was ready. In the mind's eye there was a place where the stamps were headed, a future room where your patience had already taken shape. You could almost hear the mixer's hum, almost feel the warm edge of toast held between two fingers, almost see the clean stack of plates waiting like calm moons on a shelf. The stamps built this imaginary room, one square at a time, and visiting it cost nothing. You could stand in it while washing dishes or falling asleep, a little museum of the near future that made the present gentler. If you wanted to understand how a culture thinks about hope, you could do worse than to watch it handle small promises. The stamps fit perfectly into hands that believed in the middle path, neither the stinginess that refuses joy, nor the impulse that chases it and finds nothing lasting. The stamp said, be sensible and be tender. They said, buy the beans and also the dream. They didn't ask you to pretend you could afford everything. They reminded you that you could afford something if you gave it a season. Neighbours understood the language. Someone would mention filling a book at the fence line while clipping back a rosebush, and the other would nod like they knew the feel of that last stamp pressing into place. There were trades and tips. This store gives an extra strip on Wednesdays, that one doubles if you ask nicely, and the little economy spread without fuss. It was cooperation without committee, community without announcement, people figuring out how to add a bit of softness to the edges of getting by. In houses where money was careful, the stamps gave children a job that mattered. They weren't just helpers, they were participants in the family's slow-building plan. To be entrusted with a page was to be told, your effort counts. To smooth a wrinkle was to learn, care makes a difference. To close the book at the end of the evening was to feel the exact weight of almost there. Those lessons travelled well, into saving for school trips, into mending a hem rather than tossing a dress, into choosing to wait a week before buying the thing that would be half price by then. There was also a quiet fairness about the stamps. They didn't notice if a day had been hard or a shift had run long. They didn't ask if you'd said the right thing at work or if the car had made that worrying sound on the way home. They simply turned what you could spare, some cents here, $1 there, into proof that you were moving. For some, that proof eased the tightness in the chest that comes when bills stack up and the calendar turns faster than paydays do. For others, it simply added a strand of meaning to errands that might otherwise feel like a life being spent at a counter. Even on nights when nobody felt like doing it, when heat had laid a film across the kitchen or winter had arrived early and crawled under the door, the stamps asked for so little that saying yes was easy. A few minutes, a few squares, a few words traded across the table. It wasn't discipline so much as hospitality, welcoming the future into the present in sensible, friendly portions. It's possible that this is the secret that lingered. Not that stamps were powerful, but that they made people feel powerful in ways that were safe and kind. And then there was the sound, the tiny, satisfying press of paper onto paper, like a whisper you could hear with your fingertips. It made a rhythm you began to recognize, a kind of domestic metronome that kept time with the small heartbeat of a house. Once you've listened for it, you can find it in other places. In the click of a jar sealing after you've canned summer peaches, in the dull thud of a book closing after you've read the last page, in the measured knock of knitting needles as a scarf grows to the length of a winter. The sound means you're making something, even if you can't see it yet. If someone walked in off the street, they might think it was just paper and glue, but you'd know better. You'd know that inside those neat rows were the Saturday shift someone didn't want but took anyway, the decision to cook at home instead of going out, the way hands reached for the same page from different sides of the table. You'd know that when you held the booklet, you were holding hours, a soft stack of them pressed flat here, so they could fit in a drawer until it was their time to turn into a thing you could use and touch and pass along. The stamps did not ask for belief in miracles, they asked for belief in increments. They offered a way to practice that belief, not once in a dramatic gesture, but again and again in motions so gentle you could perform them half asleep and still wake up to find you were, indeed, further along than the day before. And when the book grew thick with finished pages, when the cover bulged just a little and the spine made a dignified creak, there was a feeling not quite like pride and not quite like relief, something warmer and steadier that lived exactly where patience and purpose meet. It was simple enough to explain to a neighbour at the fence. You bought groceries or shoes or a coil of garden hose. The clerk tallied the total and then, without fuss, tore off a strip of little green proofs and slipped them across with your receipt. The number matched your spending in a way that made sense to the hands as much as the head. A small purchase, a short strip, a big shop, a longer ribbon that curled softly like a new fern. Sometimes they came loose like confetti. Sometimes they fed out of a dispenser with a soft mechanical sigh that felt oddly official, as if you were being handed a certificate for future happiness. They went into a pocket, a purse, a coat lining already familiar with quiet treasures. People had methods. Some kept a skinny envelope clipped inside a checkbook. Others slid them beneath the dashboard ashtray, or tucked them in a folded paper near the car registration. Kids, sworn to a kind of solemn stewardship, carried them home in both palms like an egg, rescued from a hedge. The stamps travelled lightly, but they carried weight, the kind that gathers in the corners of a house and turns into traditions before anyone declares it so. Home was where the soft machinery of it all began to hum. The booklet lived in a predictable place. Top drawer, second from the left, pole basket on the fridge, a tidy box beside the phone with the long curled cord. Pulling it out felt like opening a project that never scolded you for stopping and always welcomed you back. Pages laid themselves flat with the shush of paper that's been handled. The grids waited, polite, patient squares that were less about rules and more about hospitality, each one big enough to accept a small effort and turn it into a visible step. Moisture was the magic. Some used a sponge kept in a shallow dish that always looked damp even when it wasn't. Some swore by the side of a teacup, its rim holding the perfect line of wetness. Many just used the ordinary instrument you always had with you. A quick lick, not too much, and the back came to life with the tiniest suction, the whisper of a promise setting. If a stamp went on crooked, a thumb set it right. If it overlapped, the next one tucked in gracefully as if to say, "We're building this together, not auditioning for a parade." There was counting, of course, but not the tense kind that happens at the end of a month. This was gentle arithmetic, a lullaby of numbers, 5s, 10s, 20s if fortune had smiled and the week had been generous. Someone would speak it into the room, "That's 3 rows done," and the words would hang there like warm laundry. Nobody needed to be told what it meant. You could see it, the progress bar of a household moving towards something specific enough to talk about and roomy enough to hold a dozen daydreams at once. Every piece of the process offered a little reward of its own. The neatness calmed you. The steady placement soothed the jitter, left by errands and headlines, and the way time can sometimes slip its leash. There was ownership in it too, the feeling that your choices were adding up in a way you could point to. Money often moves invisibly, disappearing into ledgers and accounts you can't touch, but the stamps were different. You could feel them with your fingertips. You could watch your future organise itself into tidy rows right in front of you. And that sight had a way of straightening your shoulders. It worked because it traded in increments instead of fantasies. No one handed you a miracle. You handed yourself a manageable ritual and were repaid with evidence. The book became a companion, keeping company with you through seasons. One page filled during the strawberry weeks, another during the stretch of heat when the back door stood open and the cicadas sang like old sewing machines. There was satisfaction in closing the cover, not because the work was grand, but because it was pure. Small task done well. Tomorrow another. Even the logistics held a kindness. If the budget was tight, the stamps didn't sulk, they waited. If you skipped a week, the empty squares didn't accuse you, they simply looked hopeful. When a windfall appeared over time, a holiday bonus, a lucky Saturday, suddenly a longer strip spilled onto the counter, and the page leapt forward, like a friend jogging back to walk beside you after you'd stopped to tie your shoe. The system met you where you were and invited you to keep going. There was a social ease baked into the whole thing. Clerks understood the rhythm. Ring up, tear, pass, sometimes with a wink that said, "You're getting close, aren't you?" as shoppers compared notes without needing a committee or a chart. "They're doubling stamps on Thursdays," someone would murmur in the canned soup aisle, and it felt like the sharing of a recipe. Loyalty accrued not as a gesture toward a brand, but as a relationship with a habit that made life feel a touch more padded around the elbows. It felt good because it turned time into texture. Errands are slippery. You do them and they're gone, like footprints on a sidewalk after a brief rain. The stamps caught some of that slipping and stitched it to the days. They made errands accumulate into something you could see. And there is a relief, simple, human, almost childlike, in seeing progress instead of merely believing in it. The tidy row said, "You are not just busy, you are building." It also felt good because it was a game without losers. Children got to play at being important, counting, sponging, smoothing, while adults felt the pleasant hum of competence that comes from finishing a small job. The rules were clear and kind. Do a little, get a little closer. No trickery, no vanishing points. The only suspense was the sweet sort. How many tonight? How far to go? What shall we choose when we cross the line? Suspense, with the soft landing, has a way of putting a shine on very ordinary moments. Talk flowed around the table as the stamps went on, and the talk mattered as much as the sticking. Lists were made in the air. Someone remembered an elderly aunt who swore her best saucepan came from stamps, and this became briefly, merrily debated. Voices came and went, chairs scraped, a dog sighed beneath the table, and all the while the pages grew heavier by featherweights. The room learned a shared rhythm, paste, press, breathe, that could make even a long day feel as if it had ended in the right key. Control plays its part, subtle and generous. So much of life requires trust in systems beyond your reach. Prices rise or fall, bills arrive when they wish, weather disobeys plans. The stamps handed you back a little control without scolding you into spreadsheets. You could adjust the tempo, more this week, fewer next, like turning a dial on a radio until the station came in clean. That sense of agency is quiet medicine. It steadies the pulse, especially in houses where money had to be polite and careful. And the sheer tactility of it, the paper between fingers, the soft tack of glue waking up, the slight curl of a fresh strip, the firming weight of a finished page, tickled an old part of the brain that likes making piles and straightening them. Humans have always loved visible order. Stacked firewood, folded linens, jars in a row. The book of stamps belonged to that family of satisfactions. It sat on the shelf like a small, steadily ripening fruit, and anyone who has ever watched a tomato blush or a loaf rise knows how comforting slow ripening can be. It worked too, because it encouraged choosing rather than grabbing. The process asked you to articulate the shape of your want. Not everything, but that. A kettle with a whistle like a bird, a camera that clicks like a polite door, a set of towels thick enough to feel like a kindness after a bath. Naming the thing stripped it of the anxious shimmer that surrounds vague desire. It became part of the family story before it ever crossed the threshold, which meant it fit more easily when it finally arrived. There was a little ceremony tucked into the everyday work. A page filled and someone said, without drama, "There," and a small breeze of contentment moved through the room. A rubber band went around finished books, a pencil notation marked progress on the inside cover, and the stack, 2 books, 3, now 4, sat where you could glance at it and feel your chest loosen. It is not nothing to have proof that your days add up, that yesterday's effort shook hands with today's and agreed to meet again tomorrow. If you pulled back to the wider view, it had a folk elegance, stores and households humming to the same tune without needing sheet music. The exchange was gentle, a business saying, "Thank you for choosing us," a home replying, "I will be back," and between them this small green language of appreciation that turned into mixing bowls and radios and, more often than not, into the feeling that you could coax a little joy from the margins of your budget. It felt good in ways you noticed and ways you didn't. You noticed the neat rows, the tidy count, the sense that you and your money were on speaking terms. You didn't always name the deeper comfort, the way anticipation can make a week brighter, the way shared projects make a family move as one creature for a few minutes at a time, the way visible progress is a balm against the fog that sometimes collects around the edges of ordinary life. The stamps asked almost nothing, and gave all of that back, one small green square at a time. Some evenings, after the dishes, you lifted the book and felt its new heft. Not heavy, exactly, just more itself. You returned it to its place, and the drawer made that familiar wooden hush as it closed. Tomorrow would bring its own errands and weather and news, but tonight you had done a little work that would not unravel, and the knowledge curled up inside the house like a contented cat, purring in a language everybody understood without needing to be taught. The kitchen table did so many jobs that the stamps had to wait their turn. Breakfast spread, homework desk, sewing station, a quick stage for the school diorama with a cardboard fort and too much glue. But on certain evenings it transformed again, and everyone knew it from the way objects migrated into place without anyone announcing it. The oilcloth got smoothed with both hands. The dish of water for the sponge slid to the left, where elbows wouldn't knock it. The booklet emerged from the drawer that stuck a little, the one with rubber bands and tape and the pencil stub sharpened down to a friendly nub. Chairs scraped. A quiet, purposeful hum filled the room as if someone had turned on a motor inside the table. Roles formed naturally, the way chores can divide themselves by secret vote. Someone counted, lips moving, fingers tapping along a strip as if feeling the beats of a song. Someone licked with careful restraint, aware that too much enthusiasm turned corners soggy and made the paper buckle like a tiny wave. Someone pressed, the flat of a palm smoothing each square into its square, a warm iron without heat. Sometimes there was a cutter too, armed with scissors that clicked with authority, trimming a strip into smaller pieces so they nested neatly like shingles. The best teams had a runner, a kid who ferried finished pages to the person who turned them and whispered ceremoniously, "Next." The table looked busy but not chaotic. Stamps stacked in little platoons, a sponge dark with usefulness. The booklet spread open like a patient ledger. Light fell in a soft square from the overhead fixture, catching the idle steam from a forgotten mug of tea. On summer nights, the box fan in the window pulled the air through in long, steady breaths, turning the edges of loose stamps into a faint flutter. In winter, the radiator ticked and hissed, and sometimes a page would lift a corner toward the heat like a cat seeking a patch of sun. Words came and went easily. How many is that? 2 rows and a sneeze? Laughter. No, really. 30. Pass me the sponge. Not that wet, you'll drown it. Hand me the book. No, the other book. The talk wandered into the day. The teacher with the shoes that squeaked, the neighbour who swore his new car could climb a wall, the price of butter doing something rude again. If the radio was on, it murmured and crackled in the background. A ball game, a recipe show, the news trimmed down to hand-sized pieces. The television sometimes glowed from the other room, voices drifting in like distant party guests. But the work stayed here, at the bright island where hands moved and small achievements lined up. Each household had a trick it swore by. One family kept a shallow saucer with a thin cloth folded inside, dampened just enough that a press on the cloth gave a perfect stamp-ready shine. Another kept a small rubber roller, originally meant for wallpaper, that smoothed a whole row in one polite pass and left each stamp seated like a tile. Some used a spoon. The bowl rubbed over the page made a soft shushing sound, and the metal's coolness made everything lie flat. Tweezers appeared in serious houses where corners mattered. In other houses, fingertips did the job just fine, fingerprints briefly glistening on the glue before vanishing into usefulness. There was an economy to the movements. Tear, count, lick, place, press. Tear, count, lick, place, press. It had the cadence of knitting, of shelling peas, of folding laundry, the domestic arts that make time visible. Children learned the rhythm and fell into it with the relief that rhythm always gives. The smallest ones licked with the reverence usually reserved for birthday candles. Older ones became counters, eyes narrowing, delighted by the way numbers leapt when you stacked 5s into 10s and 10s into, "We're almost at the edge, look." Teenagers, drafted from doorways with theatrical sighs, discovered that the job took less time than complaining about it, and that the satisfaction of a finished page arrived whether or not you pretended indifference. Pets tried to help, which meant they sprawled just where a forearm needed to rest or batted one stamp to the floor and then chased it like prey. A cat could sit as if hired to supervise, eyes half shut, tail flicking when a strip slid too close. Dogs learned that the assembly line moved at snack speed and stationed themselves strategically beneath the table, collecting the occasional cracker crumb and the constant reassurance of feet finding their fur. Someone always announced the discovery of a stowaway stamp, stuck to a sleeve or the back of a hand, and the room made the small admiring noise that greets a coin found under a cushion. The book itself gathered personality from every night like this. The cover softened at the edges where fingers had thinned it. The spine learned to bend just so. The first blank page always felt like a clean morning. The last half-filled one felt like a promise. People developed loyalties to the feel of this year's paper, to the shade of green on this batch, to the crispness of a newer design or the pleasantly old-fashioned look of the ones still in circulation. Every so often a misprint turned up, ink a little ghostly, borders a hair's breadth off, and someone saved one in the back, a tiny collectible proof that even factories blink. Not every evening went smoothly. Some nights the glue didn't want to take, and corners lifted as if sniffing for a better option. Some nights the strips curled like they'd been startled, and some nights the mood was thin, patience worn by other chores and other worries. The saving grace was how little the ritual asked from anyone. You could do it with your shoulders knotted and still watch the rows even out that knot without making a speech about it. If a dispute flared about who was supposed to take out the trash or who tracked in the mud, hands kept working, and the dispute lost steam as the book gained pages. The task offered a place to put the restless parts of a day. Different homes, different scripts, same play. In one house, a grandmother presided, palms like soft paper, tongue just brushing the gum with the experience of a woman who had mailed letters in 3 wars and could still tie a cherry stem in a bow. She hummed while she smoothed, nothing recognizable, just a tune the room needed. Across town, a young couple made their own assembly line at a table borrowed from an uncle. The legs wobbled, so they took turns bracing it with a knee while the other pressed a row, laughing at the choreography. In a third kitchen, a single parent worked with 2 kids who treated each stamp like a vote for summer camp, keeping tally marks in pencil on the inside cover and adding little celebratory stars when a page reached its full grid. The evening made small marks on people. Glue turned fingertips faintly tacky, with a sweetness on the air that mixed with dish soap and coffee and the last whiff of dinner. Someone always had a faint green smudge at the base of the thumb and wore it like a merit badge until hand-washing washed it away. The counters developed their own habits, tapping a stack into alignment, turning it 90 degrees, tapping again, flipping a finished strip, end for end, before passing it on because it felt more correct that way. Micro-rituals accumulated until the whole operation went off with the ease that looks like magic from the outside and feels like friendship from within. Redemption plans, as light and shifting as clouds at first, took on more shape over the weeks. As the book thickened, the talk sharpened. The mixer, with the good motor. The camera, not the smallest, but the one that made a click you could feel. The set of towels in that exact calm blue. Lists got made and remade, penciled in and erased. A vote might be taken, a tie might be broken with the quiet tiebreaker of what would serve the most often. No one had to declare a lesson, but there it was. Practice choosing together. Practice imagining the use of a thing before you owned it. Practice letting anticipation be a kind of soft light in the room. Night stretched, and the assembly line folded and unfolded around other motions. Someone got up to check the back door. The fan got turned to a lower setting. A pan clinked into the drying rack. The book slid to one side when a plate of apple slices arrived and slid back when the plate was emptied down to the lemony shine of the china. A phone rang and went unanswered, because nobody wanted to break the good spell. Across the wall, a clock kept true and unconcerned time. At the table, the slower clock of patient progress kept its own beat. A page closing, a new page opening, the half-smile that came with seeing squares fill. There were tiny competitions that never made anyone sore. Who could place a row the straightest? Who could lay a stamp exactly in the middle on the first try? Who could count the quickest without losing track? Victory meant nothing but a small cheer and a switch of jobs. The champion counter had to try to pressing. The precise presser had to try counting to keep the game honest and the pride in check. A dropped stamp fluttered to the floor and a chair scraped back, and the dog stirred and the stamp came back up with dust on one edge, which got brushed off on a pant leg without ceremony. Sometimes, rare but memorable, an extra strip appeared because a clerk with a generous streak had torn one too many, or a store was celebrating an anniversary with double stamps, or an uncle had tucked a few into his wallet and forgotten about them until the conversation reached just the right spot. An extra strip could change the room like weather. Back straightened, eyes went bright, plans leaped forward 2 squares. The book accepted the windfall with the same polite squares as always, and the assembly line absorbed the surge without tripping over itself. The table never scolded for mistakes. An upside-down stamp found itself upside down in a neat row of right-side-up ones, and the row looked like a grin with a crooked tooth. A smear happened, and someone pressed a clean corner of a napkin over it, and the smear became a pale shadow of effort. A page went in slightly offset, and the next page overcorrected, and in the end the balance pleased the eye, the way quilts please with their tiny asymmetries that prove a human hand was here. Season by season, the props changed, but the scene stayed the same. In autumn, a bowl of apples offered itself to idle hands and got pared into curls that fell into a neat pile, the peelings red as ribbon. In winter, elbows hugged close and sleeves were pushed back to keep cuffs clear of the damp sponge, and breath made the occasional little fog in the air over the page. Spring sent in mud, which dried in shy half-moons on the floor near the door and got swept while the stamps rested. Summer brought condensation rings on the table, wiped away by the same cloth that dabbed 2 wet corners until they behaved. Some nights, a visitor pulled up a chair and fell into the rhythm as if they'd trained for it. A neighbour dropping off a casserole for a new baby ended up pressing a whole page while admiring the tiny person asleep in the next room. A cousin from out of town leaned on an elbow and told stories about a redemption centre 2 counties over, where the clerk knew everyone by name and kept a jar of peppermints for kids who waited politely. The assembly line made room, it always did. Work that can be shared without explanation has a way of making strangers into not quite strangers by the end of a row. The book thickened by degrees. One evening's worth of effort showed itself as a subtle change in heft when you lifted it to blow lightly across a damp page. 2 weeks' worth looked like a respectable bulge at the edges. A month gave the spine a contented creak. Every edition altered the sound it made when set down, a firmer thump, a small declaration that this was no longer a flimsy thing. The table knew the sound and answered with its old wooden note, a call and response learned over years of shared duties. On the sideboard, a rubber-banded stack of completed books watched like elders at a recital. Their presence steadied the room. Proof sat there, thick-backed and patient, that this ritual wasn't a story people told themselves out of stubbornness, but a practice that produced actual goods, objects that lived in cupboards and on counters and in the daily script of a house. The assembly line took a quick sideways glance at that stack and felt the nudge to keep to its pace, which was never rushed, but always earnest. No one needed to declare the deeper thing happening, but it could be felt in the set of shoulders, the easy way a hand reached for the next strip almost before the current one had fully settled. The work braided people together for an hour, quietly teaching cooperation without a chalkboard. It respected small hands and large ones, quick eyes and careful ones, the talent for arithmetic and the talent for patience. The table held all of it, and when someone yawned, another person took their role, and the rhythm didn't so much stop as shift a little, like a song taking a breath before the next verse while the pages lay open, ready for the next square to be filled. It didn't look like much when it slid through the mail slot or appeared on the counter at the store, just a catalogue with a green-tinged smile. But the house felt different the moment it arrived. The cover shone a little more than ordinary paper. The ink had that faint, inky, clean smell that rides on new pages. Someone always tapped it twice, like knocking on the door of a good idea, before opening to the first spread. The room leaned in. 1,000 small, useful futures waited inside, arranged in tidy rectangles with friendly captions and numbers that translated into the language of filled squares and finished books. The first tour was always afloat. You let your eyes wander, not worrying about math or meals or whether the broom in the corner needed replacing. Here was a chrome toaster gleaming like a promise of crisp mornings. There, a mixer with a curve to its housing that made it look fast even at rest. A set of white dishes, calm and stackable, the kind that could make an ordinary stew look composed. A radio with a dial like a moon. A camera that seemed to turn every face into a memory just by looking at it. The catalogue's writers had a gentle way of whispering use into the description. For busy families, for holiday gatherings, for everyday grace, and the phrases moved through the house like breeze through curtains. The second tour came with a pencil, not a pen. No one trusted ink with this kind of dreaming. The pencil point hovered and then circled, light at first, a thin oval that could be erased if your heart changed its mind. Some circles got thicker over days. The the way a path wears itself into grass. Stars sprouted in the margins near certain items. Check marks appeared next to things the practical mind liked. Question marks blossomed beside extravagances the heart couldn't help admiring. The pages became a map of a household's personality. This family's eye for sturdy handles. That family's laugh when the page with the accordion appeared. Another family's quiet draw toward the iron, with steam vents precise as freckles. Numbers under the pictures made everyone pause. They weren't dollars, they were counts, books and pages, and occasionally a fraction that meant this and something else. It were math you could carry in your head. How many squares left, how many pages to go, what one extra strip from Thursday's shopping would do to the timeline. Children learned stamp arithmetic without anyone calling it a lesson. They compared a kettle at 1.5 books to a set of towels at 2, weighing the feel of fluffy afterbath against the sound of a whistle that would not let water sneak away into a boil-over. The catalogue taught trade-offs with a kind voice. Arguments, when they came, had soft edges. Practical voices pointed toward the vacuum with attachments that promised to tackle stairs. Romantic voices floated to the page with the picnic set. The blanket folded into a carrying case. The plates tucked like secrets into a lid that snapped shut with a satisfying click. The dream of a radio wrestled with the need for new linen. The camera's buzz of capturing cousins at the reunion rubbed shoulders with a set of saucepans whose lids fit like punctuation. The pencil mediated. Circles waited. Nothing had to be decided tonight. The catalogue had a way of slowing time without making it heavy. You could spend 20 minutes on one spread and feel restored, as if you'd walked through neat rooms where everything had its place. The photography helped. It set each object on a little stage where light fell with kindness, and you could believe that a bread box might tidy more than bread. The tiny captions told you what sort of home used a thing well, keeps pace with busy mornings, stacks neatly in small cupboards, the set that makes weeknights feel like company. And almost imperceptibly, you pictured your own home acting like that. Each page carried a quiet moral without preaching, the idea that it is better to want one thing on purpose than 5 things by accident. You learn to say the name of the want out loud, the kettle, the blue towels, the camera with the good click, and the saying made the craving gentler. Want that has a name behaves. It sits and waits its turn. It stops haunting the grocery trip and starts cheering on the square filling in. When someone got impatient, they could be reminded by a thumb pressed, not unkindly, to the page. We chose this. We're getting there. Some families developed a system that turned choosing into ceremony. A first pass for circling anything that sparked delight. A second pass for strikes through items that only looked good, because the light in the picture was flattering. A third pass for a shortlist, argued and then agreed upon, sometimes by vote, sometimes by an elder's wisdom, sometimes by the clearly persuasive evidence that the current iron spit when it shouldn't, or that every plate in the cupboard carried the memory of being dropped at least once. The catalogue made it possible for decisions to be shared without anyone feeling overruled. The paper itself held the debate and kept it friendly. The dream book was generous with more than goods. It lent people new words for what they valued. A sentence about lasting enamel became a conversation about buying things that don't quit after a season. A note about balanced weight in the hand turned into a little lesson in choosing tools that make work feel less like punishment. Description of wipe-clean surfaces justified the radio with the shiny face to a parent who worried about sticky fingerprints. The writing wasn't just writing. It was a way for a household to speak to itself about quality and use and joy. Not everything in the book was strictly practical, and that was part of the point. A jewellery box with a velvet lining asked you to allow for small luxuries that protect other small luxuries. A child's wagot, red enough to glow even in black and white photographs, waved from the toy pages and made a case for play as a household priority. A set of lawn chairs promised a summer, with more sitting outside. A travel case whispered about trip-taking, even if the farthest it would go this year was an aunt's porch. These were not indulgences so much as acknowledgements that a house breathes better when it has a few windows open to delight. The catalogue aged in a way that made it dear. The spine loosened slightly, and the centre fell open to the pages most often visited, the mixers and the radios and the linens, like a hymn book going willingly to the favourite song. Grease bloom from fingers polished the corners. Faint rings from a teacup ghosted a margin and never quite left. The pencil marks darkened where they were retraced, and erasures left pale halos that looked like the memory of a cloud. When a page tore near the binding, someone mended it with tape laid carefully, as if repairing a crack in a beloved bowl. On quiet afternoons, a person could sit with a dream book alone and have the pleasant sensation of shopping without spending, choosing without losing. The mind moved through rooms improved by one or two thoughtful additions rather than a frenzy of acquisition. Picture the dish rack no longer precarious because the new plates nested like they belonged. Picture the breakfast line flowing because the toaster browns evenly and offers 2 slices at a time. Picture the radio's voice warm as a friend when dishes clink and rinse. A home is made of what it has and what it expects. The catalogue fed the expectation that things could work better without shouting. Children treated it like a storybook with practical characters. They imagined scenes with the wagon and the picnic set, and the tent that appeared briefly in one edition and sent hearts racing, even in houses where camping meant a sheet draped between chairs. They learned a kind of patience that made sense to them. The page had squares, the squares would be filled, and then the picture might walk off the paper and into the room. It was a different magic than coins in a jar. The book connected effort directly to a pictured outcome, making the bridge between abstract and real sturdy enough for a child to cross. Seasonality moved through the pages like weather. In spring, the gardening tools and outdoor chairs pulled eyes toward the backyard, which would soon smell like cut grass and charcoal. Summer turned attention to coolers that promised sandwiches would arrive at the beach uncrushed. Autumn made the cookware look like harvest. Soup pots with the lips that didn't drip. Baking dishes that would carry cinnamon and apple to the table. Winter brought the blankets page into focus, and hands unconsciously rubbed forearms while admiring the textures printed there. The dream book knew the calendar without needing to name the months. Sometimes the catalogue provoked a clear-sighted generosity. Seeing the baby page reminded an older sibling that a neighbour's newborn might need something kinder than the rattly hand-me-down available. The pencil made a new mark, not for us, but for them, when we have enough. Or a child would announce solemnly that the wagon could wait if it meant Grandma could have the electric kettle now so she wouldn't forget a pot on the burner again. The book trained the eye not only to want but to weigh and to share. There were pages people loved to visit even when they suspected they'd never redeem from them. The camera with the extra lens, the record player that looked like a piece of a future living room, the mock velvet footstool with storage inside. The looking was its own hobby, as legitimate as skimming seed catalogues in winter or reading travel brochures in a year that required staying put. Aspirations are gentler when they sit on paper with numbers beside them. They stop biting and start behaving like long-term plans. An odd thing happened over time. People became connoisseurs of the catalogue itself. They noticed when layouts changed, when the photography grew brighter or the captions leaned funnier. They compared editions. Do you remember when the towels came in that peppery grey? And treated last year's book like a friend who moved away but still writes. The dream book wasn't just a menu. It was a conversation that continued across months and into next year. Saving stamps felt less like waiting and more like participating. In some houses, a short ledger lived tucked into the back cover, a crisp paper marked with dates and tiny notes. Chose the blue over the yellow, agreed to wait for the bigger saucepan. Aunt May said she will lend us her extra if we need before the holidays. Decisions grew roots when they were written, and revisiting them brought a flicker of satisfaction. We said we would, and look, we are. That ledger taught something adults don't always remember to teach, that following through can be as warm a feeling as unwrapping. Gaps in the pages, places where the pictures didn't match a household's style or need, were conversation starters too. We're not the sort of people who need a punch bowl, someone might say, and then you learn something about what parties mean in this house. But a good thermos, someone else would counter, saves a winter. The dream book wasn't pressing anyone to acquire. It was holding up a mirror. In the reflection you recognise which objects would actually join your days and which would just be visitors. When a choice finally settled, an ease entered the room. Circles around the chosen item grew determined. Other circles faded, erased with a firm but friendly hand. The book closed with purpose and the pencil slid into the drawer with a tiny clink. From then on, each strip of stamps felt like a bead on a string that led to something with edges you could already feel in your mind. The dream book made the finish line visible in a way that didn't rush you toward it. It simply kept it lit, like a porch lamp that says, "Whenever you get here, you'll find the door." The night before had its own quiet ceremony. The finished books came out from their spot, rubber-banded, a little proud of themselves, and were set in a stack that made the table look like a small library of patience. Someone counted them aloud, tapping the top corner of each cover, in a rhythm the room already knew by heart. Someone else opened the dream book to the circled page, the pencil marks dark and certain now, and traced the picture with the side of a fingertip, not so much touching the paper as touching the idea of what waited at the end of a long hallway of small choices. A child wrote the chosen item's name on a scrap and tucked it into the front book like a bookmark, as if the catalogue and the stamps might need help finding each other. Morning arrived with ordinary chores that felt slightly upgraded. Dishes got washed with a bit more enthusiasm, as though the sink had heard the rumours. Shoes were found faster than usual. The books went into a paper bag saved for worthy tasks, its sides gone soft from being folded, unfolded, folded again. If the car was working, they drove. If it wasn't, or if the day was kindly enough, they took the bus, or walked with the bag held close, rain or sun, or that in-between weather that smells like pennies and lilacs. Downtown was its usual self, barber pole turning, bakery air leaning out the door to say hello, but the windows along the way felt newly companionable, as if the town knew where they were headed and approved. The redemption centre didn't shout. It had a sign with letters that had faded gracefully, and a bell that announced arrivals with a ding that sounded like polite applause. Inside, the light was a soft insistence, the colour of late morning. Glass cases held the smaller, shinier things. Cameras with their eyelids open, pocket radios with grills that looked like smiles. Along the walls, shelves climbed in tidy tiers, boxed toasters, kettles with spouts tucked like beaks, mixers nested in moulded cardboard like birds in careful nests, stacks of towels tied with ribbon that suggested gift, even when the recipient was the household that had earned them. The room had the calm smell of cardboard and newness, and a faint whisper of soap from the clerk's hands. People stood in gentle lines, their bags of books collapsing and sighing against their calves. A woman in a blue sweater held a baby who watched the ceiling as if it were telling secrets. An older man clutched a single book and a folded newspaper, eyes fixed on a set of wrenches he'd already measured against every bolt in his house. Two teenagers, serious as graduates, whispered over a record player that promised a Saturday night with better sound. There was talk, the light kind that keeps a room warm without heating it up, a murmur about double-stamp days, a story about a cousin who redeemed for a sewing machine and was now flooding the world with perfectly hemmed curtains. Behind the counter, the clerk wore a tie the colour of overcast sky and a smile that had learned everyone's pace. He had a method, and watching it was part of the ceremony. He took the books like a banker handling bonds, not because they were money, but because they were worth. He flipped through each one with efficient gentleness, the way a librarian learns to turn pages quickly without tearing a single corner. Occasionally he ran a finger across a row to encourage a lazy stamp to sit up straight, and the stamp complied, as if remembering where it belonged. A small clicking counter sat near his hand, the kind you press with a thumb. It tallied the books in dignified little ticks that made counting sound official without making it feel cold. "Let's see," he said in a voice that knew not to hurry anyone. 4 full, 1 partial. He consulted a chart with boxes and numbers that wasn't so different from the grid inside the book at home. "You are after the mixer in white," he said, glancing at the details written on a slip. "We have that. Would you like to see it out of the box?" The question was ceremonial. The answer was always yes, and he lifted the cardboard lid with the same care used to open a cake box. Inside, the parts rested in their tailored trough. Beaters tucked into a paper sleeve, cord coiled like a sleeping snake, a small booklet with drawings that smiled their way through instructions. There was always a moment when the item left its picture and joined the air. The clerk set it on the counter. Hands reached but didn't snatch. Someone tested the heft. The weight said solid but not stubborn. Someone spun a dial and felt the ratcheting whisper. The colour looked either exactly right or better than expected. The white gleamed like fresh paint. The sea foam of a kettle deepened toward the handle. The blue of towels was the precise shade of a soft sky after rain. If something needed plugging in, the clerk had an outlet. The small motor in the mixer purred a promise that sounded like cakes that don't fall and mashed potatoes with no lumps at all. Sometimes the desired model was out, and this was handled with the same tone used to discuss recipes. Kindly practical. "We have the same in cream," the clerk would say. Or, "The newer model has a tighter seal. It's 10 pages more, but we can honour today's count if you'd like the upgrade." Decisions that would have felt like puzzles in a fluorescent store became easy here. The item wasn't a trophy. It was a tool you were choosing for a job you already understood. People rarely left disappointed. They left with the thing that matched their actual days, which turned out to be the thing they wanted most once they held it. Paper moved across the counter. Not a bill, but a certificate the colour of a calm afternoon. The clerk wrote with a fountain pen that made small, friendly scratches. He handed over a receipt that tallied not money but patience spent, squares converted into a shape you could carry. No coins clinked, no wallet thinned. The exchange had already happened, long before arrival one evening at a time. Paying with waiting had a way of softening the final moment. It felt less like acquisition and more like a promise kept to your earlier self. The box closed with a sigh of cardboard, the lid lip sliding into place. The clerk added a strip of tape that smoothed under his palm with a sst that said secure. If there were accessories, they went into a bag with a loop handle. If the item was a towel set, it was offered as is, ribboned and ready to be touched. If the thing was too large, an ironing board, say, or a set of lawn chairs, arrangements were made with a pencil circling a date on a form. "We'll bring it round Tuesday," he'd say, and Tuesday became a small holiday in the house. Leaving the centre felt like stepping out of a hushed library into a kind street. The box was lighter than it looked or heavier than you expected, depending on how the day had gone, but either way it found its position against a hip or tucked into the crook of an elbow. Carrying was part of the point. Each block won on foot felt like a line of stamps confirmed. If they'd taken the bus, the box sat on a lap and became a magnet for conversation. "What did you get?" an older woman asked once, and the answer, the mixer, drew a whole recipe for Sunday rolls out of her memory, recited softly as the city rolled by, complete with the secret pinch of nutmeg. At home, there was unsealing, knife point under tape, a crisp pull that sounded like unwrapping a new chapter. Tissue paper rustled like good gossip. The thing itself emerged slow, the way a loaf lifts from a pan when you're showing off its shape to the room. Children adjusted their breath so as not to fog the moment. Instructions were opened and for once actually read. There was a kind pedagogy in those drawings. How to attach, how to clean, how not to force anything that didn't want to go. The first use asked for a kind of respect that stuck. Tools treated gently on day one tended to be treated that way forever. If it was a mixer, its feet found their place on the counter, as if the kitchen had been measuring that spot forever. A bowl, glass, with a faint wavy edge where the light loved to catch, took its place underneath. Flour was fetched even if dinner plans hadn't predicted baking. Butter sat out to soften like a guest who decided to stay. The sound the motor made at low speed was not loud. It was authoritative, a small engine of domestic progress. If it was a kettle, water went in, lid clicked home, and someone stayed near to meet the first whistle like a handshake. If it was a radio, it found a station with a voice like an old friend and filled the house in a way that made the doorbell ring seem less sharp. People developed their own small rituals for initiating a new thing. Towels went through a first wash with a cup of vinegar because someone's aunt swore it set the colour. A camera took an inaugural picture of the assembly line workforce, grins and elbows and a cat mid-escape. So the first image captured the very people who had quietly earned the click. Dishes were christened with something simple that tasted like accomplishment. Apples sliced into their curve, stew ladled against their plain rim, a celebratory sandwich that sat squarely in the centre and made the plate nod under its own satisfaction. In some houses, redemption meant the mail, not the bell on a door. The form lived in the back of the dream book. It asked polite questions, and people answered them neatly, using their best capital letters, the way you write to someone you respect. Books were wrapped in brown paper and tied with string that had known other parcels, birthday, cookies, a sweater, to a cousin away at school. At the post office, the scales weighed patience as if it were flour. Precise, dependable. Days passed, and then a box arrived with stamps stuck all over like cheerful barnacles. The cardboard smelled of travel and warehouse and tree. The unsealing felt like opening the door to a guest who had written ahead. Sometimes a hiccup visited. A whisk was missing from a mixer box, a towel had a pulled thread, a radio had a stubborn knob. The redemption centre clerk handled these in the tone of fixing a bent page. "We'll swap that," he'd say, already reaching for a new old box, or "Hold on," and from a drawer produced a spare, as if he anticipated the world's small mistakes and had made his peace with correcting them graciously. The sensation of being looked after did not come with a price. It came with the receipt of diligence in a language everybody could read. Neighbours noticed. Boxes telegraph good news when they appear on porches like precise blocky birds. Someone waved from a sidewalk, someone else knocked and came in with coffee, steamed into a jar and the excuse of, "I was just passing." A demonstration happened without anyone calling it that. Look, and the dial clicked, and the thing did what it said on the page, which is not a small delight in a world where pages often promise more than their ink can carry. The new object was not encased in the fragile shine of status. It was absorbing itself into usefulness by the minute. The house adjusted around the newcomer. A shelf made space, and in making space it lost a little clutter it was glad to see go. The cord learnt the path to the outlet that didn't require a dance. The bowl fit better than the one that had always pretended to. The towel stack sat squared, proud. The old thin one worked its way to the rag basket without ceremony. A thing that had been imagined across months moved into its appointed slot and began doing its job as if it had been born, knowing the choreography of this particular kitchen. There were afterglows too. The books that had been handed across the counter returned in memory to the drawer in a lighter form, as stories. Someone would glance at the new thing mid-use and say, "That was 6 books," and mean by it. That was a winter of soups and coupons, a spring of walks downtown, a summer of doubling on Thursdays, An autumn of clearing the table and sticking squares while the radio told baseball scores. Objects that arrive by patients keep all their addresses. They live in the present and in the rooms where they were earned. What Redemption Day did best, maybe, was stitch a feeling into the fabric of errands. The conviction that waiting is not empty. The step over the threshold into the centre. The bell ding. The clerk's count. The box sliding into arms. The ride home with a conversation recipe hovering in the air. The unsealing. The first hum, whistle, click. The way the thing found its place as if it had been expected. All of it taught a lesson too quiet to chalk on a board. It taught itself by being lived, by the way the box corners creased where a thumb pressed, by the way the manual folded back to the page that showed the diagram of the part that would, by habit, be detached for cleaning and returned. A motion that turned into a memory in the hands. From the store's side of the counter, the idea was as tidy as a row of cans turned label forward. Give something small now to invite someone back later. The decal on the front door did some of the talking before a word was said. Green, cheerful, a promise stuck at eye level where a hand reached for the handle. We give stamps, not a shout, a nudge. Inside, a little metal dispenser perched by each register, its window showing a tight scroll of green that fed forward with a click and a soft, satisfying tear. The machine made its own punctuation in the music of checkout. Ring, bag, clink, click. Shopkeepers learned the rhythm quickly. They paid for stamps in bulk. Boxes from the distributor that smelled faintly of ink and paper. Folded the cost into the invisible math of margins and watched it return in familiar faces. The salesman from the stamp company came by every so often, setting his sample case on the counter like a travelling magician. He replaced the sun-faded window sticker with a crisper one, left a stack of small table tents for end caps, double stamps on Wednesdays after 5, and showed the manager a slim binder with layouts for circulars that threaded the green promise through weekend prices. He spoke fluent grocery and gentle psychology. People like to see progress, he'd say, tapping the picture of a book with its squares half full. People like to feel that errands are part of a story. Families voted with feet and baskets. A store that gave stamps didn't have to be the very cheapest, only honest and almost as cheap, because the stamps made up the comfortable difference. This was price plus a kind of pleasure. 2 economies at once. Cash for today's stew, patience for tomorrow's kettle. Routes adjusted accordingly. On the way home, the car turned left for the gas station with the green decal. Not right for the one with the neon horse. Saturday's list aligned itself with the places that tore little strips from perforations. Hardware for a box of wood screws. The shop by the barber gave stamps, the one by the feed store didn't. A dozen small decisions drifted toward the counter where the dispenser sat. Rivalries took on a polite, almost courtly shape. If the grocer on Maple Street declared double stamps on Thursday evenings, the grocer on Elm tried Tuesday mornings or tied doubles to certain departments. Produce and meat double today. Signs sprouted on aisle ends with tidy numbers and that familiar green oval. People tracked the pattern the way birders track migration. Thursdays here, Saturdays there, and a whisper network carried the news across fences and porches. The loop tightened. Shop where stamps were plentiful, carry them home, paste them into a future. Return to the shop whose stamps were now living on your shelf like a promise you could touch. The clerks knew regulars by their books as much as by their names. You're close, one would say as the dispenser clicked out a generous ribbon after a big stock-up, and the customer would laugh and confess the secret number of pages left in the current book. Sometimes the clerk added a little extra strip with a small flourish, not favouritism exactly, but showmanship, a recognition of the loop working as designed. When a mistake on the scale shorted a pound of apples, the stamps filled the gap with grace. The currency of patience smoothed the corners where the currency of coin sometimes snagged. Merchants used stamps to move time-sensitive goods without fire sale drama. Bananas were slipping toward freckled. double stamps on fruit for the afternoon. A shipment of enamel casseroles had arrived 2 weeks early. A weekend of bonus pages for housewares drew eyes and hands. Stamps could be pointed like a flashlight. Over here, please, without making anyone feel hustled. They made please come back sound less like a plea and more like a plan you were already part of. There was a quiet contract under all this. Stores promised to be steady, clean floors, honest scales, a butcher who trimmed with a conscience, and shoppers promised to keep their feet loyal, even when a new place flashed a temporary bargain. The stamps sat in the middle like witnesses. If the cleaning got sloppy or prices crept in the wrong direction, the books on the kitchen shelf felt heavier, not with guilt, but with the weight of a relationship that asked to be respected. Most proprietors understood. The decal on the door bought a first visit. The meat case and the way the cashier spoke to your child bought the second. The stamp stitched it together so the 3rd and 30th felt inevitable. Coupons lived in the same world but spoke a different dialect. They were sharp, single-use, clip, present, done, little knives that sliced a bit off the price. Stamps were ropes. They tied days together. A person could use both and feel clever twice. Put the coupon down and watch the total drop. Watch the clerk pull the stamps and hand you a strip whose value wasn't to be measured today but next season. It felt less like gaming a system, and more like being well-citizened in a town where customs existed to make ordinary life flow. It pleased people that stamps were brand agnostic within a store. You didn't have to switch your coffee or learn to love a different laundry soap to play along. The loyalty aimed at the place and the people, not the logo on a can. That freed the chooser to keep choosing while still feeling part of something communal. The loop wasn't a leash. It was a path worn smooth by friendly traffic. When a new business opened and hung out the stamp decal, there was no need for elaborate advertising. We Give Stamps carried its own short story. We intend to be here long enough for your patience to matter. We want to be stitched into your routine. We'll help you weave this errand into a future treat. First-time customers often arrived with half-finished books tucked in the glove compartment. If the place smelled right, fresh coffee, clean floor cleaner, a ghost of oranges from the produce. The loop lengthened to include one more stop. Gas stations wore the loop especially plainly. A driver had choices every few blocks, each pump promising regular in letters that flickered. The ones that dispensed stamps turned fuel into forward motion twice, miles now, squares later. Attendants tore strips on windy days with a show of pinching them so they wouldn't fly, passed them through windows with a "here you are," and were thanked as if they'd handed over talismans. A full tank could be half a page and a sense that road and home were connected by more than asphalt. Some households ran the loop like a gentle, well-practiced drill. The weekly circular lived folded into the dream book. It told you where stamps would multiply and your route obeyed. You kept an eye on the return, the page that would fill, the book that would join the rubber-banded elders on the sideboard, the trip you'd make to the redemption counter, and that eye made you patient when the line at the register ran long. People who might have gotten prickly at the lag instead stood easy, watching the dispenser wink its little green eye for each person ahead and thinking, "All right, my turn will come, and when it does, I'll feel the click in my own fingers." From the back office, the loop looked like numbers with personalities. Grocer could see in his ledger how stamp days bent the week. Tuesdays, often sleepy, developed a hum if double stamps were offered after lunch. The meat department outsang the canned aisle on bonus days, so next week the cans got their turn. The stamp rep's binder walked managers through seasonal patterns too. Heavier redemption in late spring when brides received mixers, thicker issuing in August when school lists stretched budgets and a little extra incentive mattered. The store's decisions moved the needle gently. The household's decisions moved it back. There was a structural fairness to stamps that people noticed even if they didn't name it. They rewarded consistency more than flash. A big spree could leap a page, sure, but mostly the squares filled because someone bought beans and bread where the green decal showed. That slow accumulation felt proportional to effort in a way that made sense to the part of the mind that keeps promises. The book didn't care if a week had been unglamorous. Stamps are blind to glamour. They see volume and return affection for reliability. Sometimes the loop widened beyond a single house. A church collected books for a rummage sale fund and turned them into a set of folding tables that made potlucks less precarious. A PTA kept a shoebox on the secretary's desk. Parents slipped stamps inside, and every few months someone sat with a sponge and turned generosity into a film strip projector. A neighbour with thin times borrowed a nearly full book with the understanding that she'd return the pages in kind once her hours picked up. She did, and the debt felt more like a shared garden than a ledger entry. Stamps were personal, but they were also social glue. And yes, the loop could fray if a place forgot what kept it strong. If a store swapped decent cuts for clever signage, the stamps lost some of their shine. People would still collect them, free as free, but their feet would wander and the drawer at home would get a new folder labelled maybe later. Conversely, when a store went the other way, freshened the paint, hired the polite kid at the register, made a point of stocking the bread that didn't crumble, stamps felt brighter, as if quality had polished the gum on the back of each square. There were personal tricks to keep the loop lively. Some families named their current project and wrote it on the inside cover, radio, so that each click at the counter sounded like the first syllable of the word. Others split books by purpose, a practical stack for towels and tools, a dream stack for the camera or the picnic set. The dream stack moved slower, and that was part of its pleasure. Watching it inch forward felt like watching a seed germinate, then lift its green thoughts into the light. The loop travelled through life changes too. New baby, diapers were bought where stamps flowed, and the soft pile of squares turned into a kettle that whistled a reminder to the sleep-starved. Newlyweds setting up house chose a grocer by the combination of produce and promise, then built a kitchen with bowls and beaters earned crumb by crumb. Widowers kept to the familiar line at the familiar counter, and the clerk, who had counted their books beside a late spouse for years, tore the strip with an extra moment of eye contact that said, "I remember," and the loop held. Even the sounds belonged to it. The dispenser's click felt different in different shops, some crisp, some a little gummy from humidity, and regulars could tell them apart with their eyes closed. The stamp tearing had a pitch that changed with the length of the strip, a kind of paper music, short chits for milk and eggs, a rippling ribbon for the holiday stock-up. The counter's surface registered the little pat of stamp strips being stacked alongside the receipt, and a palm gathered both in a single sweep that ended with a familiar tuck into purse or pocket. All of this, decals and dispensers, double days and damp sponges, ledgers and ledges where finished books rested, made a circle you could step into and trust. Shop, save, dream, redeem, return. The steps taught themselves, and once you'd walk them a while, your errands and your hopes moved to the same tempo, one feeding the other without strain. The way two people on a sidewalk adjust until their strides match and conversation becomes easier simply because their feet have agreed. You could learn a lot about a household by what it turned its little green squares into. Some places chose usefulness so straightforward it almost glowed. Plates that matched for the first time in years, towels thick enough to silence a bathroom, an iron that didn't spit when it ought to steam. Other homes aimed at a single bright joy and let the practical wait. An honest-to-goodness camera with a lens cap that clicked, a red wagon that looked fast before it moved, a record player whose lid lifted like the start of a weekend. In either case, the choice revealed the math of a family's days, where the frayed edges were, where the laughter lived, what kind of future they were building out of errands. Dishes were a frequent first. They arrived nested in a stack that felt taller than it looked, white or cream or that dependable restaurant grey that forgives chips. The first dinner on new plates tasted slightly improved, though the stew hadn't changed. Children watched how the plates sat on the table, the way the rims made a neat chorus line and seemed to sit up straighter themselves. Holidays borrowed the plates' calm. Weeknights borrowed their fairness. A set of 6 became a set of 5 after an accident, then a set of 4 after another, and still it worked. Because the point hadn't been to own perfection, but to turn almost enough into enough for now. Towels mattered in a different register. They were softness disguised as rectangles, and when they were new, their pile threw shadows like a tiny field of wheat. A bathroom with good towels changed the mood of a morning. Children learned the small luxury of wrapping something warm around small shoulders. Guests noticed without making a speech. The old thin ones were promoted to rags with relief and a little ceremony, a drawer labelled in pencil, a nod to the work ahead they would do. Even after 1,000 washes, stamped towels kept a trace of their origin story. People swore they could still feel the echo of glue and grids if they held a corner and closed their eyes. An iron could hold a household's pride by the collar. The new one didn't scorch when it was asked to behave. It gave off the right sort of hiss, a professional little sigh. Shirts for interviews, hems for first day of school dresses, church trousers that decided to keep a crease longer than they used to. The iron touched all of it, and its cord learned the curve of the board like a river learns its banks. Once in a while someone ran a palm over the smooth metal, cool now, and thought about a particular page in a particular book being turned 6 months ago. Few things connect before and after as plainly as a tool that makes you look like you tried. Mothers and fathers with a weakness for reliable noise loved the vacuum, which arrived in a box that looked like a trunk you could take on a train. Its first pass over the braided rug made a pattern like the inside of corduroy. The motor thrummed a domestic key somewhere between determined and content. The hose attachments paraded their small ambitions, one for corners, one for stairs, one that flirted with drapes. Children begged to be allowed a turn and given it, discovered the strange pleasure in seeing disorder get swallowed line by line. Afterward, the living room carried itself like a person who has just had a good haircut. Mixers made bakers out of the busy. They sat on counters like little engines, their chrome putting the rest of the kitchen on notice. People who had stirred by hand learned the luxury of speed and consistency. And cakes rose as if the house had been elevated a few helpful feet above sea level. The sound of beaters on a Saturday afternoon could bring a cousin in from the yard the way a bell brings a class together. Cookies tasted like we planned ahead. Bread dough clung to the hook and let go at the right moment. Nobody ever wrote it down, but families started to keep certain recipes only for the mixer, as if the machine had negotiated a little contract with the cookbook. Radios were a common dream because they made rooms feel full even when nobody was talking. One settled on top of the fridge, and that fridge became a little stage. A dial turned. A voice arrived that sounded like it had been waiting outside politely and was grateful to be invited in. News had edges, but didn't take over. Music learned how to find its way around the clock without tripping over the dinner hour. On summer nights, after the heat relented, people leaned on the back stoop and let baseball find them, the announcer's cadence mixing with cricket noise until the game in the evening became the same long, slow story. When a song came on that everyone liked, dishes clattered less, then stopped, then rejoined the rhythm with a little flourish of forks. The camera was patience made visible, came with a strap that warmed to the neck, and its click was sound enough to count as an occasion. Families who saved for one tended to keep it where people could grab it without a hunt. The top of the bookshelf, the hook by the kitchen doorway. The first roll of film was always used too quickly, someone blowing out candles, a row of cousins squinting into noon, a dog who read the attention as permission to misbehave. Later, the developing brought the delayed thrill of proof. Pictures tacked to the refrigerator with a magnet that said Florida, or World's Best Dad, felt like interest on the original investment. Over time, the camera learned each face's best angle, as if it had become an honorary member of the family with opinions and favourites. Some choices had a hint of gleam for gleam's sake, and there is nothing wrong with that. A reel-to-reel recorder sat on a low table like a piece of scientific equipment that had wandered into a den. Teenagers haunted it, taping songs off the radio with a finger hovering near the pause button to outwit the disc jockey. An entire evening could go by with nobody speaking because the wheels were speaking, and that counted. A father recorded letters to a brother overseas and discovered his voice had a warmth when played back that he'd never heard in his own head. The machine made a private archive out of ordinary hours. Outdoor things carried a different promise. Aluminum lawn chairs with woven webbing turned a patch of grass into seating for a crowd, the legs leaving shallow squares in the ground like an old grid finding a new purpose. A picnic set in a hard-sided case meant you could lift a meal by its handle and take it somewhere that smelled better than a dining room ever could. The creek, the schoolyard on Sunday when it was empty, the strip of grass by the river where the bridge threw its long shadow. The first time a family spread that blanket and realised all the plates matched even under the open sky, it felt like the house had learned how to travel. Wagons were practically a tradition in some neighbourhoods. The first week they carried children. The second week they carried the kind of freight nobody thinks to plan for: a bag of potting soil, a stack of library books, a neighbour's lamp borrowed for a party. The paint scuffed and looked better for it. Wheels learned the particular seam in the sidewalk in front of Mrs. Olson's driveway and lifted their little chins thereafter, without needing to be told. In snowfall, the wagon became a sled that didn't mind a little gravel, and in autumn, it collected leaves as if the yard were a country with a harvest to bring in. Sewing machines were practical magicians. The first time one came out of its box, there was a pause in the house, a hush that wasn't about fear but respect. Threading it felt like following a map that only looks complicated the first time. The pedal translated ankles into speed. The needle turned fabric into decisions. Curtains learned their length. Pants learned their patience. A dress learned to hold its own. A string of rickrack lived in a drawer from then on because there is always something that looks happier with a little zigzag. Later, the machine fixed things money couldn't buy back. A favourite shirt rescued from a rip. A child's stuffed animal made whole enough to sleep again. Typewriters clicked their way into homes that liked the look of the important paper. A desk didn't need to be big. It just needed to fit the carriage's sweep. People wrote letters they had meant to write for years and discovered that their thoughts sat up straighter when dressed as words struck onto a line. Resumes rolled out like proof a person had been working all along. A son learned to hunt and peck and applied to a scholarship he would win. A mother typed recipes with carbon paper so a cousin in another state could bake the same cake on the same day and feel less far away. Cookware was a vote for routine. A stockpot gave a name to Sundays. Soup, stew, something that took all afternoon but asked only for gentle attention. The enamel grew a constellation of flecks that told you where the ladle had lived. Cast iron pans built glossy memories one fried egg at a time, taught teenagers what patience looks like when heat meets fat, became heirlooms that tasted faintly of a grandfather's bacon even decades after he'd stopped making it. Lids fit without clatter. Handles didn't lie to hands. The kitchen learned to breathe in rhythm with the stove. There were items chosen with others in mind. A cake carrier with a locking lid turned one household into the designated bringer of sweet things. A folding card table meant that at holidays there was no kids' table, so much as an expansion of the main one, the family elongating like an accordion to include every laugh. A set of matching tumblers made it possible to pass water around a yard to sweaty neighbours, helping haul a sofa up 3 porch steps. An extra pillow or two bought with leftover pages meant no guest ever went home saying they slept crooked. Not every choice stayed forever, and that was all right. The radio might be replaced by a larger one with a dial that glowed, but the first migrated to the garage, where Saturday found it and kept it company. The wagon, once it had done the work of childhood, learned to carry plants at a yard sale for a price written on masking tape over its original logo. The old towels, shrugged into their new role, became the most beloved rags in the world. The kind of cloth you grab without thinking when a jar breaks and blueberry runs, impossible and bright across the linoleum. Objects aged into the next chapter as gracefully as people did. Sometimes the choice was not about an object at all, but about a scene the object would create. Binoculars meant mornings on the porch reading birds as if they were short poems. Cardinal, chickadee, the triumphant hawk that circled over the schoolyard like a professor late to class. A globe offered children a spinning way to say where, and let fingers land on places nobody in the house had been, but everyone could picture. Cairo, Juneau, a town whose name made everyone smile because the letters linked arms in a pleasing way. A thermos promised hot cocoa at the skating pond and coffee that stayed civilized to the last swallow on a long winter drive. Weddings prompted a different kind of choosing. Families hugged finished books to their coats and walked to the redemption counter like a wedding party without flowers. Towels in the right shade meant the couple would think of everyone who'd licked stamps and smoothed them down every morning for years. A mixer became a way to say, bake yourselves a life that rises. A set of flatware that didn't bend at the first sign of chicken was a way of wishing unbending under pressure. Sometimes the couple chose for themselves with a candour that was enviable. We want the vacuum. And the room clucked in approval, because truth at the beginning is a kind of protection. There were extravagances nobody regretted. A fountain pen that felt like ownership of your own name. A mantel clock that listened to the house and decided where on the minute hand it would tick slightly louder, as if to wake anyone drifting too far from the hour. A porch swing that taught the lesson rocking chairs already knew. Some motion restores. It does not require distance. A telescope that turned the backyard into a planetarium and put the moon's familiar face into focus so precise it made everyone, for a strange second, a little homesick for a place they'd never been. People told stories about their redemptions the way fishermen tell stories about water. This was 2 books and 8 pages, they'd say, patting the toaster with affection. We got it the summer Aunt June stayed with us. The object and the season stitched together. You couldn't mention one without the other wandering in. A whole family could recount the day the camera arrived, who opened the box, who read the instructions, who posed unwilling, and then asked hopefully if their picture had turned out not terrible. The memory of waiting wrapped itself around the thing like another layer of packaging, but this time it didn't get thrown away. What families chose tended to last because the choosing had done some of the work of repair in advance. When the mixer hiccuped and needed a new beater, people went gentle, not brittle. When a towel snagged, someone trimmed the pull and found the mending needle without huffing. The commitment had been prepaid in evenings. It felt natural to oil the sewing machine, to polish the chrome on the kettle, to reweb the lawn chair with a colour that made everyone grin. Care followed choice the way a shadow follows a body. Neighbours borrowed without embarrassment. "Can I take your cake carrier on the Saturday? We'll need the wagon for the church sale. I heard your binoculars can see the road sign from here. Can I test them?" The object travelled and came back with more stories. A tiny dent in the thermos became a permanent laugh line. That was the day someone dropped it in the creek, and it made a sound like a drum before it was rescued. A scratch on the radio's case became a notch in a household's legend. The cat, Chase, the vase, the unbelievable leap, everyone ending up wiser if not drier. And then there were the quiet choices that never made it onto the front page of anyone's life but added up to something steady. A step stool so a child could reach the counter and stir. A dictionary because the house liked to win at crosswords without cheating. A doormat with bristles that remembered boots and sent them in cleaner than they arrived. A kitchen clock whose second hand made a friendly little skip at the top of the minute, reminding the room that time is a partner if you treat it that way. Across years, the redeemed objects formed a kind of museum of patience that nobody would ever charge admission to. You could walk through a house and read the labels in your head. The pot that taught someone to salt at the right time. The mixer that beat frosting for a birthday when money was tight but cake was non-negotiable. The wagon that took a grandfather's toolbox around the block one last lap before he gave it to a grandchild with a solemn, joyful warning about hammers and thumbs. These were not luxuries and not merely tools. They were verbs in metal and wood and enamel. Toast, mend, iron, mix, listen, play. They were the habits of a family made visible, inked not just on paper squares but on mornings and evenings and the shared middle of a life. It didn't happen with a bang. It happened the way paint fades on a sunny porch, so slowly that you only notice when you move a flower pot and see the colour that used to be. One season, the dream book felt a little thinner in the hand. Another, the redemption counter shifted to shorter hours. A handwritten sign in the window asking for patience and offering apologies that didn't quite say what changed. The dispenser at the register still clicked, but not as often. Sometimes you had to remind the new clerk what the little green machine was for. "Oh, right," they'd say, tugging the strip with a polite smile that didn't have the old rhythm in it. Stores had new tricks, big banners fluttered. Weekend blowout, manager's special, buy one get one. And the stamps felt modest alongside all that noise. The circulars got glossy. Cartoon mascots shouted prices from the page. Someone in a back office had discovered how to make a sale feel like a parade, and the parade drowned out quieter customs. The loop that had filled the drawer with tidy books frayed in places you couldn't see but could feel when the book got left on the counter for a week and no one scolded it back into the drawer. At home, time was changing shape. Dinner moved later because commutes stretched out and the radio traffic report learned everybody's name. Microwaves arrived like friendly magicians, turning minutes into meals and making the stove's slow conversations rarer. Both parents worked because they wanted to, or because they had to. Either way, evenings became a collage of homework, laundry that somehow multiplied when no one looked, and a tiredness that made the ritual of sponge and stamp feel like a chore, even though it used to feel like a spell. The dish with the damp cloth went dry and stayed that way for a while. No one threw it out, it just slid farther back. Prices climbed with a new kind of impatience. Eggs, then milk, then a sudden jump in the cost of something you bought every week and never thought about, because it had always been reasonable. Napkins maybe, or a jar of pickles. The little raise in the paycheck felt smaller by the time it arrived. Money did the vanishing act that stamps couldn't fix, not really. Credit cards, sleek and promising, arrived in envelopes that said your name like they'd known it forever. They offered points and instant approval and a kind of futures contract on a toaster, if you didn't look too closely at the fine print. Waiting began to feel old-fashioned, sometimes unfair. The soundscape shifted. Instead of the soft rip of perforation and the counter's mellow thunk as a book was set down, the checkout lane filled with electronic beeps and the sigh of plastic bags opening themselves. Barcodes whispered the story of what you were buying without looking anyone in the eye. Self-checkout set up camp and looked efficient doing it. A person could scan, pay and leave without hearing another person's voice. Stamps, when they did appear, looked like guests at their own party, knowing a few faces, smiling politely, unsure where to stand. Redemption centres had their own pale season. The clerk with the rainy morning tie retired. The new manager split his time between this counter and 2 other tasks and didn't know the sound of the mixer anyone preferred. Boxes still stacked along the walls but fewer, and the green glass in the front door needed washing more often because fewer hands pushed through it. One day a note appeared, "Closed Tuesdays," and no one could remember it ever being closed on a Tuesday before. Another day the note changed, "By appointment." Later, the sign carefully came down, and the bell that had once applauded arrivals made one last small noise as the door closed behind the man carrying it to his truck. Not every book went empty. A lot did. Half-filled squares slept in drawers next to take-out menus that had multiplied and colour-printed themselves into confidence. A rubber band went brittle around a stack of almosts. Children who had licked corners and learned counting by rows grew up and, cleaning out a house, found a slim inheritance in green, enough for a towel and a memory of a bowl of water on the table, and the smell of glue that was also the smell of staying put long enough to finish something. Some brought the books to a centre far on the other side of town and traded them for whatever still matched the numbers. Some kept them in a box labelled MISC, ribbons, family photographs, and the stamps for a mixer that would never quite cross the counter. Stores kept trying to keep loyalty alive. Punch cards with coffee cups that shaded in one by one until the 10th drink was free. Receipts that printed points in tiny numbers at the bottom, a ledger you had to squint to see, mailers with barcodes you could scan to enter a sweepstakes, random acts of discount, announced by cheerfully non-committal emails. The shape of reward changed from substance to surprise. The predictability, the way a family could plan its future around the squares in a book, gave way to a feeling that you might be lucky if you kept showing up, which is its own kind of charm, but a thinner one. There was loss inside the gain and gain inside the loss. Convenience is not the enemy. It saves people from burning out on the parts of life that are just friction. A single mother with 2 jobs didn't mourn the ritual. She blessed the microwave, held tight to coupons, swiped a card that gave cash back, and went to bed 30 minutes earlier than she might have without any of those things. A father who hated the creep of interest and the way mail called his name in red ink still admitted that there were years when the only way to fix a leaky roof was to borrow, and stamps would have been a bucket under a drip, not a new shingle. The culture's relationship with time shifted its weight. Waiting came under suspicion in a dozen little ways. 2-day shipping turned into next day dared same day to cross the line, and the idea of standing in a room full of boxes and asking a clerk to count your small patients started to feel like theatre from a kinder era. The kitchen table lost a few jobs even as it gained others. Laptops arrived and opened easily on its surface, bringing offices into homes in ways that made stamping nights seem as distant as iceboxes and Sunday suits. The table didn't complain, it just kept receiving whatever a family needed to lay upon it. Some people felt that the change and fought to keep their rituals alive. They made stamping nights out of other tasks, letter writing with real stamps, Christmas cards with glue sticks, scrapbooks with their own grids. They saved in jars and wrote the goal on masking tape. Radio replaced by weekend, replaced by fix the porch. They taught children what a ledger feels like so a spreadsheet wouldn't be their first lesson in accumulation. They weren't pretending the world hadn't changed. They were preserving the muscle that knows how to make small steps matter. Other people didn't notice the fade until their hands fell into a gesture they hadn't made in years, smoothing a paper square, aligning an edge, and felt a muscle memory tug. In thrift stores, books showed up like messages in bottles, half full, 3/4 full, a cover inscribed with a name and a year, priced at $1 or $1, their value separated from the system that made them valuable. Collectors appeared, rescue workers of a kind who loved the design, the fonts, the idea that so much domestic history could be held in something so quiet. Memory decorated what remained. A person opened a drawer in a parent's house, smelled old paper, and was 9 again for an instant, elbows on the oilcloth, lips tingling from the odd glue, the radio describing a game that mattered intensely until it didn't, replaced by another game that mattered in exactly the same way. Another person found the ribbon from a towel set tied into a bow around a stack of letters written in a steady hand. Loss in the house made the bows reused look like thrift and love at once. No one wrote a moral, the bow wrote enough. The last redemption centre in a town often didn't know it was last until after. Business had been slow. The manager noticed which boxes never needed reordering. The delivery truck shrank from a truck to a van on Tuesdays, then stopped coming on Tuesdays altogether. When the notice arrived from headquarters, it used words like consolidation and new benefits and modernisation, which are not lies but are not an elegy either. On closing day, a few people arrived with bags of books and were received like guests who had come during a rainstorm. The clerk, who'd learned to keep spare beaters for the mixer everybody liked because small breakages happen, found himself giving directions. There's still a centre 2 towns over if you don't mind the drive, and the phrase felt like a map getting redrawn while he spoke. What left the most lasting space was not the goods the stamps had bought. Goods can be bought in 1,000 ways. It was the pause the system created, the bedtime story tacked onto the end of a day. Count, dab, press, smooth, close the book. The pause taught that progress can be felt before it can be seen fully, that a small action at a kitchen table can carry over into a future morning when a kettle sets itself to sing. When the pause left, the day still ended, the kettle still sang, but something about the arch between those moments changed. The arch got shorter. Sometimes shorter is better. Sometimes shorter asks too much of the heart's ability to believe that effort goes somewhere when it cannot watch itself accumulate. In photographs of living rooms from the old era, you can sometimes spot a small stack of ribbed-backed books on a sideboard, tied with a band like a bundle of kindling set aside for the first cold day. In photographs of living rooms that came after, you can spot the new symbols of progress: remotes, a bowl of car keys with tags from national chains, a laptop cord coiled with the lazy authority of a well-fed cat. If you look closely, the promise hasn't disappeared. It has put on different clothes. But even dressed differently, promise does not always remember to sit down at the table and invite everyone to lay a finger on it. In some towns, people tell you about the year the flood came and the water took the first floor up to the windowsills. They describe the mud in a voice that sounds like sand, and then someone always says, a little surprised at themselves even after telling it many times, but the books, those little stamp books, they were fine. Rubber band-held, pages stayed. It's not that they were waterproof, it's that the memory of what they used to make possible glued itself to the paper more stubbornly than the water could insist. Even in a box of ruined things, the green squares held their grid and looked like the map of a neighbourhood that you could walk through again if you put on boots. The fade left behind habits that found other forms. People still collected things in rows: jars on a shelf, coins in a tin, stars on a chore chart, lessons on a calendar. A house still measured itself by what it could accomplish in increments, saving up for braces, for a small vacation, for a chair that's kinder to a back. The difference was the absence of the ceremony that used to teach the lesson gently each week. Now the lesson had to be invented or imported from some other place, and people did, because they're good at making meaning out of scraps when they want to. And sometimes, when a long weekend arrives with no plans and the light is generous and the kitchen table is clear, a person might find one last half-filled book in a drawer where the phone books used to live, and they might take it out and run a palm down the old familiar cover. The glue has gone shy, the sponge dish is long gone, but the hand remembers where to place the next square, and the heart remembers the hum that rises in a room when a family leans toward the same small future, even if the future this time will be something else entirely. If you squint at a checkout screen or a coffee app, you can see the old green idea flickering underneath the pixels. The squares turned into dots, the books into dashboards, the lick and stick into tap and scan. Now the proof of patience lives behind a password, a constellation of numbers that rise a little when you buy flour and rise a lot when you book a flight. The Dreambook became a feed that refreshes, a row of icons that promise small futures. Free drink at 150, comp night after 25,000, next tier 3,200 to go. The pictures are brighter, the the font's friendlier. The confetti is virtual and cleans itself up, but the feeling that tiny actions can add up to something that feels like a treat, that part is stubborn. It survives every redesign. Your day runs through a dozen invisible dispensers now. Morning, a scan at the cafe and a star winks into place, a little spark that assures you the latte was also a step. The app hums with micro habits. Visit 3 times this week for a bonus. And you adjust your route like a fish following a current. Noon, the grocery receipt prints a QR code and a summary that reads like a secret handshake. Multipliers applied on produce and pantry. Points earned 480. Evening, you pick a rideshare and see a small banner, double points tonight in your area, and your thumb chooses without making a speech. The loop is still there, only quicker and quieter. The kitchen table, so long this stage for squares and sponges, lost its paper ritual and gained a glow. Phones go down face up after dinner. 2 or 3 accounts opened in quick succession. Someone reads the monthly statement like weather. We are 2,700 shy of a free flight, if we can catch that dining bonus. Someone else hunts for a limited time offer with an end date that behaves like a season. People don't lick stamps anymore, but they do argue gently about category spend and whether streaming services count as entertainment this quarter. The pencil has become a finger tracing a progress ring. The hopeful sigh. There it is, unchanged. A family that used to circle mixers and radios now circles maps. Points migrate to miles. Miles condense into weekends. A calendar on the fridge collects sticky notes. If fares hold, if seats open, if we can transfer at 1:15 without losing the bonus. The old arithmetic returns with new units. Children learn the grammar of minimum spend, the way they once learned the count of squares per page. They watch a number climb and ask the ancient question, how many until we get it? There's an answer, and it keeps them patient, even when patience looks like tapping a phone instead of smoothing paper. The redemption counter became a button. It lives at the end of a breadcrumb trail with labels like use points and hind, apply reward. The room is the same, the house the light after dinner, but the ceremony is shorter. No bell on a door, no clerk with a thumb counter. Instead, a confirmation screen blooms, and a swirl animation congratulates without making you blush. A few days later, a box arrives or an email lands with a barcode that stands in for a ticket. You still carry something home, but it's in your pocket or on your screen, and it asks to be charged overnight. Coffee loyalty is a small echo with a clear ring. Dots fill, and a drink costs nothing. Someone grins into a lid. It's fast and sweet. It doesn't pretend to be a mixer. Groceries have learned the old trick of amiable generosity. Accelerated points on apples 1 week, pantry staples the next. The app replaces the end cap sign. You chase multipliers the way your grandparents chase double stamp Thursdays. Retailers have figured out that a little game makes a checkout feel less like subtraction, so the store teaches you rules, buy 2 for 5 times points, and you teach the store you will return if the rules feel fair. Airlines run the longest echo. They took patience and wrapped it in altitude. Miles grow in the dark while you sleep upright. They also grow at the grocery, at the gas pump, at the hardware store, because cards taught the system to listen beyond the gate. A person earns toward a seat that reclines enough to make an overnight seem like a nap taken on purpose. A person aims for a lounge where breakfast behaves like hospitality instead of a transaction. There are charts, some published, some inferred, all argued about with the zeal once reserved for the best place in line at the redemption desk. The kitchen table meets the route map, and families plan a trip the way they once planned a toaster. Hotels hum the same tune in a minor key. Nights turn into nights. A card in your wallet smooths the check-in script. The front desk smiles in a practiced way that still feels welcome. You learn the ritual names, silver, gold, platinum, and the thresholds start to live in your head like birthdays. Children who understand ladders instinctively ask how many more stays until the one where they let us check out late. The difference between a treat and a habit is thin in these rooms. The trick is to keep it a treat. The points don't object either way. There are new frictions dressed up as ease. The old breakage was a stamp that fell under a radiator. The new breakage is expiring points, devaluations that soften a chart like butter left on the counter, blackout dates with the politeness of a wall. The math can be obscure on purpose. You learn to read parentheses. You learn that from 15,000 points can mean anything at all after the sun goes down, and the ritual to stay friendly has to include reading the fine print without letting it sour the room. It's possible, lots of households are doing it, but it asks for attention that used to be spent smearing glue and telling stories. Debt lurks where paper never dared. A card hands you a head start and waits to see if you can keep up. Stamps taught patience by making you do the work first. Points can tempt you to borrow the feeling of later in exchange for a promise to be careful. Some people are careful and harvest the game. Some people get harvested. The old system didn't have interest. The new one will cheerfully sell you your own future and charge rent. The echo's faithful, but the room is different. You have to listen harder to hear which parts of the song belong to you. And still, the good parts are good. A teacher uses grocery points to shave the price of a holiday ham and buys an extra pack of crayons with the cash left over. A nurse stacks pharmacy rewards until a box of vitamins becomes free, and that feels like someone, somewhere, saying thank you for a shift that ran long. A student collects coffee stars during finals week and trades them for hot chocolate to hand to a friend who's studying until the library yawns. Families pull miles so the cousin stationed overseas can fly home without swallowing a month's pay. The system's found a way to be generous when people steer them with a steady hand. What vanished mostly is the household ritual that turned saving into a scene. The screen made loyalty private. A person can become gold alone, but some families recreate the table on purpose. They print a simple tracker and tape it inside a cupboard. Boxes to colour, a goal written in marker, flights to grandma, tent for summer. They put a jar on the counter and throw in the week's coin-shaped wins that points can't catch. A coupon clipped, a meal stretched, a day chosen for no spend. When the email confetti falls, they make physical confetti out of grocery circulars and toss it for real. The house laughs. It helps. There's a new kind of dream book too, though it doesn't smell like ink. It's a shared album with saved places, menus, and pictures of beaches someone wants to meet. It's a list in a notes app labelled Redeem For, and filled with links to small upgrades that make a day gentler. A thicker pillow, a kettle that pours like it means it, a park pass that turns Saturdays into trails. The catalogue page is infinite now, and that can be dizzying. The pencil trick still works. Circle one thing, name it, let other things be interesting without being invited home. Apps gamified the old patience and invented new tiny celebrations. Badges, streaks, fireworks that blossom on a screen when you hit exactly 1,000. It's cheerful and sometimes hollow, sometimes not. A streak convinces a person to keep walking to the cafe instead of driving, and the day feels better. A badge convinces another to read for 20 minutes. A little icon persuades a third to choose the grocery apples that fund after-school programs with points. The line between manipulation and motivation is thin, but it's not invisible. People step on the right side of it more often than they get credit for. Transparency suffers. The clerk once counted a book in front of you. Now an algorithm counts in a server rack that hums 1,000 miles away. To calm the new doubt, households adopt old habits. A notebook, paper or digital, where they write their balances at the first of the month. A snapshot that turns fog into fact. A shared email folder called trips or rewards keeps confirmations from slipping into the river. A calendar reminder pings when points are about to expire, the modern version of the aunt who used to say, "Don't let those sit too long." Community moved online, but it didn't die. Forums trade the new version of fence line tips, this week's double multipliers, that program's hidden corner where your miles stretch like elastic. Strangers post redemption photos, a window seat with a square of wing, a cafe table with a free pastry and a book with a cracked spine, a hotel view that looks like a screensaver made real. The comments read like the old cashier's knowing winks. "You're close," someone says to a username. "Hang in." And in small rooms everywhere, people still feel that pleasant forward tilt when effort starts to show. The visible proof is a progress bar, not a page of squares, but the sensation is recognizably human. You're not just spending, you're building. You still argue kindly about what to get. You still have to choose one thing on purpose so that a dozen things don't choose you by accident. You still learn over and over that the moment of redemption is sweeter when it remembers who earned it. Some households, missing the glue and the laughter, invent their own analogues. They keep a physical jar labelled with the name of the digital reward and drop in a bead for each 500 points earned. Clear. Blue. A few gold ones for bonuses. Little hands rattle the jar and understand. They hang a paper map and circle the destination the way their grandparents circled a kettle, then draw a line in crayon as the miles accumulate. When the free night post or the ticket appears, they put a sticker on the day in the calendar and call it by a capital letter, as if it were a holiday that belongs to them. The echoes also reach into smaller corners of life. A pharmacy offers a $5 reward for getting a flu shot. A family pizza place emails a birthday coupon that feels like your name sung quietly into a room. A hardware store points program turns 3 years of weekend projects into a new drill that will not scream when it meets a stubborn screw. None of these are grand. All of them lift the day a little. The world that replaced stamps has more doors and more noise. Sometimes the trick is finding the quiet ones that open to something that looks like the old kitchen table, where a small repeated act has a destination you can picture without squinting. Even work absorbed the grammar. Employees sit through onboarding that promises points for wellness challenges, badges for training, discount portals whose catalogues look suspiciously like the dream book with HR at the top. People roll their eyes and later cash a few and buy a toaster that toasts evenly because evenness is a virtue in a week that did not always offer it. Classroom teachers run their own economies, stars on charts, marbles in jars, to teach patience and show that kindness accumulates. The instinct to make progress visible is older than any program. Programs move around it like birds around a bell tower. If the screen stripped away some of the ritual, they also gave new ways to share the result. A free coffee becomes a photo to a sister 3 states away. "Look what our little game got me." A flight booked with points turns into a message with an exclamation point and a seat number. A hotel upgrade becomes a short video of the view from a window at sunset, sent to a family group chat that answers with heart emojis, which are not the same as clapping in a redemption centre, but are not nothing either. And if you miss the clerk's careful count, the bell on the door, the bag that sighed at your calf, you can bring back a piece of it without pretending the world hasn't changed. Gather the family at the table with a printed goal or a jar or a map. Let the app do its humming. Let your hands do something visible anyway. Teach the old lesson with new props, that the future likes to be built in small pieces, that choosing is warmer when it's shared, that the moment a plan crosses the counter, however a counter looks now, still feels like a promise being kept. And that feeling is the part worth protecting while the rest of the world updates itself again. We keep the way a house felt when small work gathered everyone in. Not the exact glue or the brand of paper, but the posture, elbows in, shoulders relaxed, talk easy because the hands already know what to do. We keep the sound of the table learning our rhythm and giving it back, a soft shush as a page turns. the whisper of paper settling into its grid, the little celebratory tap when a row is done and someone can't help but mark the moment with a fingertip. Long after the system fades, the body remembers how to be patient together. That muscle, once grown, doesn't go away. It just waits for the next job that needs gentleness and repetition more than noise. We keep the talent for choosing on purpose. The world invites 1,000 tiny grabs every day. The stamps taught a different grammar. Name the thing, look it in the eye, then walk toward it in measured steps. That grammar survives. It turns up in grocery aisles when a hand reaches for what lasts instead of what dazzles. It shows up in closets that hold fewer, better things. It appears in budgets that leave room for gifts with no occasion except, "We thought of you." The habit of circling with a pencil turns into the habit of considering, of asking whether a new object will fit the household story or I'll argue with it. Even if nobody says dream book anymore, the voice that once said, "Let's make a short list," still clears its throat at the right time. We keep the dignity of small economies. It is something to discover that persistence can be counted, that thrift is not deprivation but choreography. A page of squares trained people to see progress where the world did not bother to point it out. That sight lingers. It lets a person feel a little proud on a Tuesday for packing lunch, for mending a cuff, for coaxing another week from a pair of shoes without turning the day into a sermon. You can't frame that feeling, but it hangs on the wall of the mind just the same. It catches the light when a family pays cash for a necessity, or decides a cheaper joy is not a lesser one. We keep the shared imagination. The catalogue wasn't just pictures. It was a map to a somewhere everybody could point at. That practice, dreaming in the open, negotiating cheerfully, weighing delight against duty without making those words enemies, still lives in kitchens and cars. It's there when a family plans a trip with markers and tape on a paper map, when teenagers argue the merits of a second-hand guitar versus a new jacket, when grandparents ask what would make the most difference right now and mean it. The room remembers how to picture a future that fits in the cupboard and in the calendar both. We keep the ability to read objects as sentences. A towel says, "Warmth matters." A kettle says, "Pause here." A mixer says, "Some celebrations are non-negotiable even when money is tight." Later the grammar expands. A bookshelf says, "Time lives here." A porch chair says, "This house makes room for endings that are actually beginnings, the conversations you can only have when you've run out of errands." The habit of listening to things for what they mean, as well as what they do, turns a house into a language you can speak fluently. We keep the feeling that patience can be touched. It's hard to teach that to a child with words alone. The stamps taught it by letting fingers assemble tomorrow one square at a time. That lesson reappears in chores that seem too small to matter until they do. A jar with coins, a garden row that looks like dirt until a green thread lifts its head. A practice schedule with boxes coloured in. Adults need the same proof sometimes. They find it in the way a savings account number creeps, in the slow deflation of a debt, in the stack of letters actually mailed instead of the imagined. The relief isn't just the result, it's the proof that a person can keep a promise to their later self. We keep the table as a tool. Not everyone keeps the same table, but the idea of a flat, friendly surface where a household decides itself into being that stays. Now it might hold a puzzle, a row of clipped recipes, a laptop with a chart, a stack of bills with a pencil laid crosswise on top, like a baton. The table knows it is where fairness is practiced. Whose turn, which goal, what trade. The table knows it is where celebrations are planned and repaired. Things are set down to be admired for the small miracle they are. When a home loses its footing, one of the quiet rescues is to clear the table and sit at it. The stamps taught people to return to the surface that steadies hands. We keep the clerk's kindness if not the desk. Someone in the world will always stand on the other side of a counter, a pharmacist, a librarian, a worker at the thrift store. And the memory of being treated like a person whose patience had value, makes us expect and also extend that respect. It changes the script of errands in ways too small for headlines. Eyes meet, a question is answered fully, a mistake is corrected. Without heat. The old redemption bell rang for each arrival. Now the bell is the way next is said. When someone says it like they mean welcome, a little of the old ceremony returns. We keep the sense that loyalty is a choice we make together. Stamps didn't bind, they invited. That distinction sticks. It keeps us from telling ourselves we are trapped by a routine, when we are actually committed to it. We can leave, we can stay. If we stay, it's because the bread is fresh and the butcher cuts fair and the place remembers our name, without using it like a sales pitch. This applies to stores, to habits, to people. The Green Book's taught an everyday version of covenant. I'll keep coming if you keep being worth coming to. We keep the way a household tells time, not just by clocks, but by thresholds with a feeling to them. First page of a new book, last row before a counter trip. Now those thresholds might be different. Last payment on a used car, first Saturday with a new porch swing, the day the pantry finally holds what it should without juggling. But the sense of almost there still sharpens everybody's attention in a pleasant way, and the moment of crossing still asks for a small ceremony, a photo, a quiet there, a cake baked because marking matters. We keep the right to mix practical and beautiful without apology. The catalogue gave permission. You could redeem for towels and also circle a picnic set you might never get, and neither choice meant you loved the other less. The house learns to be a commons for sense and whim. A well-made broom leans in the corner like a line of poetry. A vase from a yard sale keeps the season honest on the table. The budget can breathe, mend here, splurge there, make both decisions with your face pointed toward the kind of life you're actually living. We keep the art of making progress visible. When effort hides, discouragement grows. When effort can be seen, people keep going. The green squares were a technology for morale. Today it might be a paper chart clipped to a cupboard, a string hung across a wall with clothespins that hold photos of steps taken, a shared note on a phone that everyone edits when they pass a mile marker. The content changes, the need doesn't. We're creatures who like to see our footprints while we're still on the path. We keep the memory of slowness as something gentle instead of punitive. Slow is not always the enemy of joy. Sometimes it's the ingredient that lets joy stick. The stamps rebranded waiting, not you can't, but you're doing it. That reframing is useful everywhere. Rehab, school, grief. A person who has felt waiting as a movement can sit with the long kinds of days without thinking they are being punished. They can mark tiny advances without mocking them. They can be on their own side when there's nothing to do but keep doing. We keep the apprenticeship to care. Stamps weren't fragile, but they asked for careful fingers. So did the mixer's first use, the towel's first wash, the radio's first tuning. That apprenticeship extends outward. It looks like oiling the wooden spoon, wiping the knife dry, putting the lid on the jar with respect for threads that want to cross. Care for things becomes practice for care for people. Don't force. Align first. Try again gently. Finish what you start. The motions rhyme. We keep the catalogue's quiet ethics. It praised durability without swagger, utility without scorn for beauty, improvement without insult to what you already had. That tone can guide a life. It keeps us from treating newness as a moral category. It reminds us that replacing can be a form of gratitude when the old has given what it could, and that keeping can be a form of intelligence when the impulse to swap is just restlessness in costume. We learn to say enough with satisfaction, which is a sentence the day is always waiting to hear. We keep the ability to make ceremony out of ordinary thresholds. A full page earned a rubber band around a stack. A redemption earned a bus ride that felt like a parade in plain clothes. Now a paid-off bill earns a dinner where the napkins are the nice ones. A finished quilt earns a photo on the clothesline. A first day at a new job earns a hand on a shoulder and the words, "We knew you would." Ceremony is a way of anchoring memory. It teaches the house what to remember. We keep the drawer, not the wood and not the exact contents, though many houses still have that one drawer with tape, rubber bands, a pencil stub, but the idea that there is a place for the in-progress and the almosts and the tools for tending them. The drawer holds whatever the current patient's needs. Envelopes stamped ahead of time so letters actually go, a roll of quarters for the laundromat, a map folded to the page of the route you mean to try next Saturday if the weather cooperates. Knowing there is a place to put the nearly protects hope from being scattered. We keep the neighbourhood woven through the ritual. Stamps taught us that progress can be communal. People borrowed, swapped, advised, celebrated. That social economy still works. A ladder travels, a recipe travels, a casserole travels to a door that has been knocked on by news that buckle the knees. When a family redeems for something lovely, it passes round its use like a plate. Take the camera, borrow the lawn chairs, keep the cake stand until you don't need it. The loop remains gentle and strong, need, ask, use, return, with a thank you that says more than the object itself. We keep the sense that frugality can be generous. The point was never to clutch, it was to orchestrate resources so the household could say yes more often where it mattered. That orientation persists. The same person who likes a double-stamped day is the one who buys extra when peanut butter is on sale because the food drive needs it. The same household that counts squares counts blessings, and crucially finds ways to make those blessings leave the house on purpose and arrive somewhere they're needed. We keep the willingness to teach children with jobs that are real. Licking and pressing seemed like play but had weight. The page would not fill without small tongues and steady thumbs. Children felt their effort join the families. Now it might be carrying wood, labelling containers, calling the bank to learn how to ask a question politely, and persist until a human answers. When children are entrusted, they mirror back the trust. Later, they are the adults who don't panic when a long plan needs tending. We keep the origin story of certain objects. You can look at an old bowl and say, "Cool, that was 3 books and 4 pages the summer the river was low," and the bowl looks back as if to say, "I know, I was there." Over time, the objects become index cards for a family album without pictures. The pot that stewarded soup when a baby had colic. The iron handle warmed by 1,000 shirts before 1,000 mornings. Even as things are replaced, the new things learn the old script, enter the room humble, become part of what we do here, hold some memory but not all, because memory wants to spread out and live in more than metal and clay. We keep the instinct to look after what looks after us. The mixer gets wiped under the base, the radio gets dusted where the grill meets the dial. Later, the bike chain gets oiled, the thermostat gets new batteries before winter threatens, the smoke detector gets its steady little test beep on a Saturday when nobody minds the interruption. Maintenance is love that knows how to use a rag. We keep stories that make scarcity less frightening. The books taught that having not much is not the same as having nothing, that a sequence of not much can turn into something you can invite people to use with you. That memory stands up in hard winters, in leans between paychecks, in the months when the car eats more than its share of the budget. It keeps panic from running the house. It keeps creativity in charge. Eggs become dinner 3 different ways. A walk becomes a date because the air is fine and conversation is free. We keep the permission to let joy wait without wilting. It's easy to forget that anticipation is its own flavour of pleasure. The green squares trained palates to savour almost without gnawing on it. The skill translates everywhere. A letter that takes time to arrive means you get to think about the person twice. Once while writing, once while reading. A project slow to ripen gives you 2 crops, the finished thing and the hours you spent moving toward it with people you like. We keep the bell at the door even if it isn't there. It's inside now. It rings when an effort crosses into result. The email that says confirmed, the neighbour who shows up with the borrowed thing and a thank you pie, the sigh a room makes when the last coat of paint cures and the evening light sits down and approves. The bell is the inner sense that something has completed correctly and kindly. You hear it, you look around for someone to smile at, you pass a piece of the good news to a person who helped you get here. We keep the green itself, the colour of patience getting its way, in corners of life that have never seen a stamp. It's the file folder where you keep important papers in good order. It's the stripe you paint on the handle of a tool so it can find its way back home. It's the leaves you clip off basil because you finally learned how to pinch properly for more growth later. It's the chalk line a carpenter snaps before a cut, choosing straightness before speed. We keep the quiet pride in ordinary competence. Stamps never promised excellence. They're rewarded showing up. That bar is one a person can reach on weekdays. It fills a pantry without Instagram. It balances a checkbook without applause. It greets children after school with a look that says tell me, and then actually listens while shelling beans. Competence makes rooms safe for feelings. It is underrated until you lose it. The books taught how to practice it until it became the weather of a home. We keep a tenderness for small rectangles, tickets, photos, index cards, seed packets, recipe cards transparent with butter at the corners, because long ago, small rectangles were how hope travelled in our hands. That tenderness makes us slow down long enough to tuck a child's drawing into a frame, to copy a phone number neatly, to slip an encouraging note into a lunch where it will be found at the right hour. A square is a shape the heart trusts. It looks like it will hold. And we keep most of all the sense that a day can end with evidence, not a grand statement, not a perfect result, but something you can point to that says, I was here, I moved something forward. It could be a page of words, a row of beans planted, a bill paid, a shoe mended, a phone call made, a new skill practiced badly but practiced. The habit of proof steadies sleep. It lets the future tug on the blanket without pulling it off. You close the drawer or the notebook or the app and feel that old good weight in the hand. Even if the thing you set down is only a pencil worn to its last honest inch. Even if the proof lives in your chest where the glue used to dry. Even if the surface in front of you is bare wood and you can see in the grain the faint grid you've learned to lay over everything. If you still have a few of those little green books tucked in a drawer, or just a memory of stamp nights at the table, tell me about it below. What did your family redeem for? What tiny ritual stitched your days together? And if your stamps now live in an app or a points balance, what's the small thing you're quietly saving toward? If tonight's story felt like a warm light in your kitchen, tap like, subscribe and ring the bell so the next slow, gentle story series finds you right on time. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that small acts add up and that patience still has a place in a loud, hurried world. Thank you for watching, for listening and for being part of this calm corner. Until the next one, keep choosing on purpose, keep making progress visible, and keep a little room on the table for what you're building. This is the Sleepy American tucking in for the night. Sleep well.